Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're having a wonderful day today. Today we're going to go through all the books that I read in January to start off 2025. This is my first wrap-up video on YouTube, so you don't really have a concept of what I normally read, but this month I'm actually really proud of myself for getting through 7 books, which is probably the most books I've gotten through in a month before, and I was really happy with that. That came out to a total of 2,888 pages. 3 of the books that I read this month were printed paperbacks and 5 were digital, 2 of which were ARC copies that I received from NetGalley. And I had an average rating of 3.43 stars amongst all of those books. I was really happy with the reading that I did this month, so without further ado, let's get into the books that I read and what I thought of them. So the first book I read in 2025 was Dragonfall by L.R. Lamb. Basically, centuries ago, humans betrayed dragons and stole their magic and banished them to a dying world. And now dragons are revered as gods by the humans because they don't remember the history. They haven't been told the history, whereas dragons remember and they do not forgive as easily. It centers around a human named Arcady who steals a powerful artifact from the bones of the Plaguebringer and in turn pulls through a dragon named Everin through the veil into the human world and traps them there. And it goes sort of into the world from there. This book has a lot of LGBT rep and is set in a world where you can express your gender freely, and it's indicated by a certain kind of sign language that you do when you introduce your name, and then you sign what gender you are when you introduce yourself to people. And I really think that was a really cool concept, and it's just in this city, I should say, not all the cities in this world, but this particular city, it's actually accepted that that's what you do. You don't just assume you signal until they signal what they are. I liked that idea, but it is sort of still in a world where stereotypically a feminine sort of human does feminine jobs and a masculine human does masculine jobs. So it's still very much in that way, but it's just a lot easier to tell what gender everyone is, and the main character is actually classed as any, as they would signal. I did love that the dragons had feathers. That was really interesting. I really liked that concept because it's something I haven't read before. I feel like involving details like that made the world set up quite unique, and I actually really appreciated that in a fantasy book when I've read so many fantasy books before, especially recently a lot of dragon books. I will say though that the world building was quite slow, and it probably took half the book for them to slowly get through the world building of it. I honestly think that what made it harder for me to read was that you're going between first person perspective, second person perspective, and third person perspective, depending on whose point of view you're reading it from. And it was so confusing. I'm not usually someone that really notices that sort of thing in books. I don't really notice the perspective I just read. If it's a good book, I'm going to ignore it. I don't notice it, but it's really good. But with this, because it kept jumping between it so often, I think because of the pace of the book as well, it was just so much harder for me to get through, and it took me a solid month to get through, and I ended up finishing a fair chunk of it in January. That's why it's included in this reading wrap up. But honestly, I think because it was so slow, I did have trouble with it at the start. Once I got to the halfway point, we did start to pick up. We were doing something different. We weren't just walking around the city. We were doing something different with it. So it did get interest then, and then I started to sort of get invested in the story, but it did take a while to get into it for me. The next book I read was a part of the Buzzword Reading Challenge for Books and Lala on YouTube, and that was to include truth or lies in the title of the book. And I chose Catcher in the Lie by Jess Lowry. There's not much to say about this book because it was only 44 pages and I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but I'll bring up the description and read the description to tell you what it says. So the description says, 2 agents on the trail of a serial killer, a mother and a daughter on the trip of a lifetime, fates converge in paradise. So I've since found out that it's a prequel to the Steinbeck and Reed series. But also it's a part of Amazon's short story series collection called Getaway. So basically a bunch of books about people getting away from certain things. I did find it was interesting finding certain truths out in the book. I do think the ending was a little bit rushed, but I enjoyed the ending. The ending is what made it worth it and what made my rating so much higher than it would have been for a 44-page book. It's a really great setup for a series. Unfortunately, if it was just relying on the short story collection by Amazon, it probably wouldn't have been the best book for me to read. So the next book I read was for my local book club, and we read Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I ended up reading the extended version that included both the Little Women and the Good Wives, which I actually think is what made it a little bit better for me. So basically, it follows the lives of the 4 March sisters, Jo, Meg, Beth, and Amy, and it follows them through their childhood into womanhood. I was really excited for this book because I really liked the movie that came out, the newer movie, and I thought I'd really enjoy the book. So for years I've been meaning to pick up this book, and I thought this was a great opportunity to pick up the book. But ultimately I think it was too slow for me. It was really drawn out and slow, and I was getting confused in the scenes where they have acting with each other and they're portraying other characters. I got really confused. My friend actually picked up the dramatized audiobook version from Audible, and she enjoyed it a little bit more than I did. I honestly think that would have saved it for me. I needed to be less confused in those scenes so I could hear their voices and tell who they were, and the sound effects would have been a lot better for me in my experience personally. So ultimately it wasn't as good as I thought it was. I did really enjoy following the girls on their adventures through childhood into womanhood. I enjoyed it. Like, it may have seemed mundane what they were doing, but I enjoyed going through all the ups and downs with them, and I did enjoy that, but it was a lot to keep my interest in, and it took me a fair while to read. So unfortunately I did not predict that to be as bad as it was for me, but it could have even been the wrong time for me. I don't know, but at the end of the day, I've read it now, and I can say that it was probably a little bit long for me. So next time I go into a classic, I might start with a smaller one, maybe even Pride and Prejudice, Emma, one of those ones. So we'll see how we go from there in the future. 4th book I read was for the She's Booked and Busy book club, which was the Homey and Homely book club on Fable. We read An Ember in the Ashes. It's inspired by ancient Rome, but we are set in the Martial Empire. So Leia lives with her grandparents and her brother in the quarter, and when her brother gets arrested for treason, she tries to find the rebel group to try and get their help. But in return for their help, they send her on a mission where she has to risk her life to be a spy within the military academy to get them some answers. Then we meet Elias, who's a part of the military academy, and he is one of their finest soldiers, but he secretly wants to be free of the tyranny that he's been trained to enforce. But what happens when Elias and Leia meet and figure out that their destinies are entwined? This book makes you sort of question who you should trust, and I really appreciate that the main female character also didn't just start off like a badass. She genuinely was scared and second-guessing herself all the way through the start of the book until she found her courage and her bravery to stand up and do something about it, and to really think, oh, if I don't do this, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I really liked that it wasn't just instant. You sort of got her build up into what she was going to be at the end. I will say this is labeled as young adult, but I think it does it in a way that's not too juvenile, so it really would be enjoyable for adults or young adults to read. The world building is so well done, and I really, at this point, the character development is so good, and I would fight for Leia. I love her so much. I can't wait to get into the next 3 books in the quartet. The next book I read was Whisper of War and Storms by C.L. Mecca. Basically, our main character, Mevlida, has travelled to York, England with a friend, and she's trying to find out the truth behind her family heritage because her mother doesn't remember and also won't tell her anything else she doesn't want to find out. So she's gone and taken it upon herself to go over to there and figure it out. And she ends up finding out that she's possibly the long-lost princess of Aetheria, a world of immortals and magic that's accessed through a portal. One problem is Mevlida didn't know that she was missing. I found this to be quite a cozy fantasy book, but I do feel like it was giving me in-between book. For a first book in a series, I just wanted more character development. We got a heap of world building, a lot of world building that was really good. I really enjoyed the world, but there wasn't enough character development for me to get attached to the characters. There just wasn't enough pages. Also, everything came to her really easily. For someone who's been missing and is apparently in danger, she didn't seem to be in that much danger. She seemed to be completely fine through the whole thing. We didn't see any of the danger that was said. Maybe in the second book we'll get more of that, but at the moment in that first book I didn't see any of it, so I don't even know whether I will be continuing. It was a fun sort of reading time for me. I did enjoy it for the most part. I just feel like maybe I haven't read enough cozy fantasies, but it's not fully cozy fantasy. It's not like Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies or Bookshops and Bone Dust. It's not like those books. I just feel like it didn't have enough high stakes for me to take it seriously as anything but a cozy fantasy. So unfortunately, it was a little bit of a downfall for me. I did get it as an ARC copy on NetGalley. It had good building blocks. I think it just needed more pages. The next book I read was The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. It's the 10th annual Hunger Games, and 18-year-old Coriolanus Snow with his fellow classmates is chosen as mentors for the games. Before now, they didn't have mentors. And basically, his family's currently fallen under hard times, and he's relying on his tribute winning to get the prize so that he can save his family's name and image along the way. But unfortunately, the odds are not in his favour, as he is assigned the female from District 12. I had a really good time with this book. I love a good villain origin story, and this is sort of unlike your normal typical villain origin story. This is definitely an origin story of a villain that you would see today. If something like this happened today and we were coming back from a war, I do believe people would think and feel like this and make their decisions based on these sorts of things. You spend the whole book sort of jumping onto his side and being on his side, and then second guessing why you're on his side in the first place when he says stuff or things happen. And I appreciated how it showed him spiraling into the person he becomes in the main Hunger Games trilogy. I really appreciated going on that journey and figuring that out. I liked that it was kind of a realistic portrayal in the aftermath of war and trying to avoid more war because of that trauma. I do feel that you would benefit more from this book if you were familiar with the Hunger Games trilogy and the whole world in general. It is still enjoyable on its own, but I really appreciated a lot of the Easter eggs and little nods to certain things, especially the Mockingjay and the Hanging Tree song. I was really having a really good time with those. This book even made me more excited for developments into this world, into this series. So I'm really excited for Haymitch's side of the story when Sunrise on the Reaping comes out, and I'll definitely duck straight out when that releases to get it so I can read it as soon as possible. The last book I read was Emberclaw by L.R. Lamb. So this was the sequel to Dragonfall, and I received an ARC copy of the sequel. This was originally going to be a trilogy, I believe, and it's now just a duology, so it's just these two books. And L.R. Lamb has said she might delve back into it eventually, but for now it's finished. I feel like jumping between first, second, and third person perspectives in this one wasn't as harsh as the last one. I do think it was a lot smoother and a lot easier to do. We weren't dealing with slow world building, so I wasn't distracted by it as much. It blended really well into what was happening in the book, so it was less distracting then and made the experience a lot better for me. I really enjoyed the aspect of the academic trials filling the gaps that I thought were left in the first book, that it ultimately made that first book feel lacking in a way. And I appreciated how certain characters' stories were finished off. I really was so happy for a lot of them. I ultimately think with this one, I just wanted more dragons. I wanted more of their perspective. We lost a lot of their perspective, and I was reading it for the dragons ultimately in the end. That's kind of bad for me to say that, but I really liked the dragons. So having less of the dragons in this book was a little bit of a letdown for me. I would have loved to see dragons and humans interacting more than they were, much like how they were interacting in the first book. That would have been really good. But anyway, I guess that's the finale of the series for now, the end of a duology, which is okay. It was a little bit better than the first one, but it wasn't my most favorite book. I again still appreciate that the dragons are different to what I'm used to reading about dragons, But yeah, unfortunately, because there was not enough of the dragons, it was a letdown for me a little bit. But it was still a good book to end the month off. And I did actually finish it. Technically, I finished it at 2 a.m. on February 1st. But I finished majority of the book in January, so it counts. It counts. So that was all the books I read in January. That was my full January wrap up. I was really happy with the amount of books I read this month. And technically, it is currently February, but I'm hoping to read just as many books in February as I read in January. I'm not aiming for more because I did a really good job in January for myself. If I get more, then that'll be a bonus. No worries at all, but I don't mind if I get a little bit less. I'm going to take it a little bit slower. I do have 2 books for book clubs lined up, and I am currently reading Onyx Storm and really enjoying it. So I'm almost done with that, probably finish it today, but I'm hoping to talk about that one in the next monthly wrap up. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I hope that the rest of this week is just as wonderful, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.